The first settlers who came to Casper, Wyoming, faced many hardships. They had chosen a barren and seemingly heartless land, and they brought little with them that would have helped them in their struggle to conquer it, other than their own tenacity. In fragile wagons, loaded with meager supplies, they crossed the North Platte River on their way west, into the comparative safety of Fort Casper, and under the protective wing of the cavalry. This passage to the west was not an easy one, and the settlements along the way were tenuous dots of civilization on a wide and empty expanse. Settlers here had to surmount their problems without outside help. That took a special courage. Here in the mountain west, the Indians told the newcomers of another hazard. Legend says the soldiers who came first were told to forsake this country. The Indians spoke of the valleys of the aching joints, of areas where many had sickened and died. Judging from Army records and other information for this period, it is quite possible that among these mysterious fevers was the one we know as rheumatic fever. The people of contemporary Wyoming are well aware of this problem. The fever that puzzled the Indians remains a serious health hazard today in the northern Rockies. Towns like Casper lie within what has been referred to as a strep belt, one of the 5 so-called belts in the United States. This means that these communities report a relatively high prevalence of infection with the microbe known as the streptococcus, and as a result, a high rate of rheumatic fever and rheumatic heart disease. But in Casper, the citizens decided to do something about this. They have created and enforced a community-wide streptococcal surveillance and treatment program that has all but eradicated rheumatic fever in their school-age population, and which has become the model for a statewide program under the Wyoming State Health Department and for the U.S. Public Health Service control programs in Colorado and Alaska. Rheumatic heart disease begins as an infection with a particular strain of streptococcus. Certain people react to this infection with the fever and aching joints known as rheumatic fever. One attack of rheumatic fever tends to follow another every time the susceptible person is infected with the streptococcus. The aching joints and fever disappear, but repeated attacks lead to damage of the heart valves, rheumatic heart disease. Of the rheumatic fever victims who are left with heart damage, something under 20% of the total, some may undergo corrective heart surgery, some may not. All will have to live within the limitations dictated by chronic heart disease. And in any case, the rheumatic fever victim, once recovered from his first acute attack, must undergo continuing surveillance and prophylaxis to prevent a recurrence of the illness, to which he is left more, not less, susceptible. A streptococcal infection may also lead to chronic glomerulonephritis, or Bright's disease, a serious kidney disorder that may eventually require the victim to undergo repeated, expensive treatments on an artificial kidney machine. The average victim of rheumatic heart disease spends between $25,000 and $50,000 on his illness during his lifetime. There are more than 1.5 million such persons in the United States alone, and each year, 16,000 of them will die of a disease that has been called the most common, serious, preventable disease. The Casper community became disturbed at figures like these and with the help of local residents, such as cardiologist Dr. Brendan Phibbs, organized an efficient system for detection and treatment of streptococcal infections, thus getting at the heart of rheumatic fever control.
If you went to a doctor and he told you you had cancer or leukemia, or that your child had polio, you'd be terrified, and rightly so. On the other hand, if you went to a doctor and he said your child has a strep throat, you wouldn't be very excited about it. The ironic thing is that the strep infection in either the throat or skin could be just as deadly as cancer and just as crippling as polio. We physicians who lived in Casper realized that this was one of our major public health hazards. We determined to do something about it.
Their program of disease prevention at the grassroots level started its fight against rheumatic fever in 1954. Now, every morning when school is in session, a team composed of volunteers arrives at each of the Casper elementary schools. These individuals, usually mothers with school-age children of their own, go to a room set aside for them by the school and prepare their equipment for the morning routine.
Some schools will take and have a team of mothers that will come in a week straight, and then they'll be off for 5 or 6 weeks. Well, like we do it here, we have teams of 2. They come in once every other week. I've found that this is probably the easiest on everybody because they know every other Thursday is their day.
The women are provided with the equipment they need by the streptococcal control program. They are preparing to inspect a certain number of children for signs of sore throat or fever and to swab the throats of those who are likely to have streptococcal infections. At the same time, the classroom teachers are determining which children should appear for inspection. Any child who says he has a sore throat is sent, as is any student who brings a note from home requesting that he be checked. And every day, 1 row of children is sent as well. In the case of kindergarten classes, all the children are sent for inspection daily. The age group between 5 and 18 is by far the most susceptible to rheumatic fever. This is why a surveillance program centering around the elementary and junior high schools is effective in controlling the disease. In any elementary classroom, as many as 1 child in 4 may be carrying streptococcus in his throat. These children may or may not feel or appear ill. All who carry the streptococcus are vulnerable to rheumatic fever, and all are capable of passing along the infection. The children who do not appear ill are the asymptomatics.
Okay, come on. Okay. Hi there. How you doing this morning? Okay, you can go. Hi there.
Symptomatic kids are children with no particular sore throat. They're not complaining of any symptom of strep, so we swab them anyway. These are the kids that you want to pick up. They're not complaining of any illness or any problem, but they're the ones that are running around class spreading it all over.
All the selected children appear in the swabbing area. The volunteers inspect each of them for swollen glands, a red throat, or purulent drainage, and swab those children who have any of these signs.
The strep lives up in back of the uvula, and if you take your swab and go at a downward angle first and make a circle coming up and do it properly, the child will gag, which pulls the strep down to where the swab can pick it up. You have to be rough.
While the swabbing progresses, careful records are kept. The swab is given a number which corresponds with the child's name and school.
We usually just take turns. One of us will do the swabbing one day, and one of us will do the records. If we have a huge amount of children coming through at one time, we just work together whichever way works out the best.
The team usually works for only 15 or 20 minutes each morning. They then gather their materials and leave. One goes home while the other takes a side trip to deliver the swabs she and her teammate have collected to the John B. Tripany Jr. Rheumatic Fever Control Laboratory, named for a local pharmacist who died of rheumatic heart disease. Mothers from each of the schools bring their swabs to the laboratory every morning, and laboratory personnel then prepare culture plates. These plates are incubated overnight. The following day, the presence or absence of the streptococcus can be determined. Laboratory analysis of plates made from throat cultures is the only way to positively identify a streptococcal infection. A visual diagnosis by a physician is inadequate when working with streptococcus. After the identification of a positive growth, one of the lab personnel telephones each school with the names of children who have Group A beta hemolytic streptococcus, the strain of organism that leads to rheumatic fever.
We process on the average of 1,500 cultures a day. Last year we processed 156,000 cultures in the laboratory alone. Out of that we had 740 some streptococcal infections.
Has positive culture. I've contacted her mother, and she used to walk.
Children who have a positive culture are required to take a note home explaining this to their parents. The note states that the child will not be readmitted to school until he has been adequately treated by a physician or until subsequent culturing proves that he no longer has the infection.
The real problem comes in when a child says, "But I don't feel sick. I don't have a sore throat. I don't cough." Then you have to say, but this is the bad part, that this disease can be in your body and you not know it. And thank goodness we can find him and make sure that he doesn't grow. Sometimes you just have to out and out love them and cuddle them and explain the whole thing again about how serious this can be and how marvelous it is that we have the ability to help them through this illness.
In a very real way, the entire prevention program hinges on this legal right to exclude a child with an infectious disease from school until he has been treated for his infection. Most states have this right. The Casper prevention program runs smoothly now. There are more than 400 volunteer mothers. There is a well-equipped laboratory, and the citizens are fully informed about the necessity of such a program. But like all projects of this magnitude, the Casper program's beginnings were marked by the problems involved in getting large groups of people from different walks of life to work together. Two men in particular were responsible for conceiving and initiating the plans that would develop into a full-fledged program. Dr. Phibbs, a cardiologist, approached Dr. Donald Becker, a pathologist, with the idea for a streptococcal control program. Some initial testing needed to be done in the schools so that there would be sound statistical evidence to show the County Medical Society, local service groups, and others who would have to become involved if the program was to work. Someone was needed to do the lab work.
We were both interested in the possibility of some sort of an intellectual stimulation in terms of a project or something that could be done here in this community with the facilities that we had at hand. Brent, of course, has always had a major interest in cardiology, and rheumatic fever has been a problem in this community for many, many years. So one day, quite informally, in a conversation, Brent and I discussed the possibility of trying to do something about the rheumatic fever program.
Now, the key part of the whole program boils down to what you convince the throat swabbers to do or teach them to do. And that is to get a throat swab up behind the uvula, where the red spot is here, at the back of the throat. And that's where you find the streptococcus.
Mobilizing enough volunteers to cover the school system was a major undertaking. These women had to learn to inspect with the aid of a tongue blade and a flashlight for the signs of a streptococcal infection and to swab a throat properly. Interested physicians did the initial training, then the volunteers began to recruit and train each other.
I'd never heard of a strep culture program before we moved here. But when school started and the kids brought home a note from school about the program, we were in the motel for a month before we got our house, and would you believe it, I was involved in the program before I got out of the motel. I figured that when I do it for other children, I'm also protecting my own.
Training the mothers was one thing. Training the lab personnel was another, because they required technical training. The hospital lab soon found they could not handle the growing volume alone. Mrs. Joanne Taylor, a registered nurse, was pressed into service. She had no background in microbiology, but she trained and now does most of the identification work in the laboratory.
I'd been doing cultures at the kindergarten where my children were going to school, and on my way to work, I would bring the cultures and stop and talk to the technician who was doing the cultures. And Dr. Becker one day called me and said, "Joanne, would you like to work in the throat culture program doing microbiology?" And I said, "Yes, I'll try it." For 1 year, I worked with Dr. Becker every day until towards the end of the year, he put me on my own, and since then I have used him as a backup whenever I have had a question on any culture that has been involved in the program.
One very important group to pull into the program early was the local physicians. They were needed to help with the initial volunteer training, but most of all, they were to become involved in the treatment of children whose cultures were positive. The Natrona County Rheumatic Fever Committee was set up to coordinate the education of the total community by the medical society.
All of us in Casper have found that it's not necessary for the physician to re-examine this child. All that needs necessary is that the nurse verify whether this child is allergic to penicillin. This is very important because it cuts costs to the family. And any means that the cost can be kept to a minimal level, the more successful the program. The treatment of beta hemolytic group A strep is either penicillin by injection or oral or erythromycin orally. If given by injection, this is long-acting penicillin, or if it's given orally by penicillin or erythromycin, it's 10 days of oral medication, specifically 10 days of medication.
Casper was the first community to attempt a comprehensive program of this type. And since it was the first, the project had to be designed from scratch. The laboratory was the crucial area. Lab procedures had to be both effective and economical. Effective so that there was little or no faulty identification, and economical so that the service could be provided to the community at little cost. There were some previous studies in the field to consult, and there were professionals in the medical world who would give advice about technique and procedures. But beyond that, it was all up to Casper and the people of Casper.
After many years of working with this program on a very, very tight budget, we now have some of the finest equipment in our laboratory that can be bought, including our fluorescent antibody microscope. The microscope is quicker, more accurate than any other means of streptococcal detection. The conjugate stains only the group A streptococcus. The others fade out. You see nothing but the A. And it's a round chartreuse circle, very predominant.
The lab itself is now a well-supplied and highly technical installation. It was not always so well supplied. Functioning on an austere budget, the technicians had to keep an eye open for good bargains and use all their resourcefulness. So did everyone involved in the project.
We quite often have fathers who are traveling into town bringing cultures in on their children from the ranches. We have many outlying districts. We have bus drivers who bring in cultures that mothers have taken at school. We have even one time had a team of a father and a mother, actually I believe they were grandparents, who went every Thursday afternoon and did throat cultures on the kindergarten children.
The Casper streptococcal prevention program is now somewhat of a local institution. In the beginning, it was necessary to educate the public, but now a well-informed public is keeping its own watch over the program. Casper doctors say that any physician who tried to tell a Casper mother that her child had a strep infection without first having taken a throat culture would get one standard retort: "How do you know?" Since its inception, the program has grown in many ways, in many directions. It has grown out into the community at large. For instance, it is not uncommon for parents to come directly to the laboratory and request that their throats be swabbed, or to bring their preschoolers in for the same reason. Funding of any community program is always a problem. Casper raises its own money through a local fundraising organization. Each year, this health foundation gathers enough money during a week-long drive to provide the culturing service free to the community. Even the children contribute. On Valentine's Day, they give to the fund instead of exchanging cards with their classmates. But the program has reached farther than Casper. Other towns began conducting similar throat swabbing sessions in the schools and mailing their swabs into the Casper laboratory. In fact, the state is now dividing itself into two sections. Towns in northern Wyoming send cultures to Casper, while southern communities send theirs to the Public Health Department laboratory in Cheyenne. This state involvement helps to keep money available for the laboratory. There is no doubt that this community has developed and managed to sustain a successful streptococcal prevention program. The nature and extent of the success is not difficult to evaluate. This much is known. Not one case of rheumatic fever has been reported among the 14,000 school children in Natrona County in more than 4 years. The rate of streptococcal infection in Casper school children has dropped to less than 3 per 100, rather than 25 per 100. But nobody knows how many Casper children, who are now young adults, did not get rheumatic heart disease because of the program. Nobody knows how many school days these children would have missed if there had been no program, or how much money the program has saved the community and the people in it. Questions like these are rarely asked in Casper. Those who are involved in the program are surprised at such inquiries. They have proven the feasibility of this program to others, but most importantly, to themselves. And that seems to be enough.
One has to face certain facts about streptococcal disease and follow those facts to their logical conclusion. First, one must grant the fact that streptococcal pharyngitis preceding rheumatic fever is very often so mild that the victim never brings it to anyone's attention. Granting further the fact that rheumatic fever is at its peak incidence in school children during the school year. Admitting, therefore, that most streptococcal infections preceding rheumatic fever will not be detected or treated, then the logic behind an organized attack on the reservoir of streptococcal infection in the school child population is tremendous.
Casper's gratifying results can and have been duplicated in other streptococcal control programs. These methods were extended over the entire state of Wyoming with equal success. And when the United States Public Health Service copied the Wyoming experience in a high-risk area in Colorado, they met with excellent results. Thus, the end of the film about Casper should be, and is, just the beginning.